The packed auditorium buzzed with anticipation. Journalists crowded the front rows, cameras flashing, microphones angled forward. On stage sat former President Bill Clinton, invited to give a keynote address. But what the organizers hadn't anticipated was that he would veer off script, directly into a heated attack on Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. Clinton leaned into the microphone, his southern drawl amplified across the hall. "I'll tell you what's wrong with politics today," he began, his eyes narrowing. "You've got newcomers like Jasmine Crockett, loud, reckless, and all talk. No real experience, no understanding of what it takes to lead. She's nothing more than a headline chaser." Gasps rippled through the audience. Some attendees looked at each other in disbelief, others whispered nervously as the camera zoomed in. Clinton wasn't just making a passing comment, he was tearing into Crockett's character with the kind of ferocity that drew instant media attention. What Clinton didn't realize was that Jasmine Crockett herself was seated just a few rows back. She had been invited as a surprise guest, waiting for her turn to speak after him. As Clinton's words echoed through the hall, Crockett straightened her back, her expression unreadable. She was calm, but her eyes burned with focus. The crowd sensed it immediately. Something big was about to happen. As Clinton wrapped up his scathing remarks, the room seemed to hold its breath. His words had left a sting, and many wondered whether Jasmine Crockett would let them slide or confront the former president directly. The moderator began to thank Clinton for his remarks, but before he could finish, Crockett rose from her seat. The audience erupted in murmurs as she made her way to the stage, every camera swiveling to capture the moment. She didn't wait for an introduction. Taking the microphone with steady hands, Crockett turned first to Clinton, then to the audience. Her voice was calm, but carried a sharpness that cut through the silence. "With all due respect, Mr. President," she began, her eyes locked on him, "experience without accountability is not leadership, it's privilege. And if calling out corruption, standing up for working families, and refusing to bow to the old guard makes me loud, then I'll wear that badge proudly." The crowd erupted in applause, but Crockett wasn't finished. She leaned forward slightly, her tone sharpening. "You see, people aren't tired of hearing my voice, they're tired of hearing excuses from people who've been in power for decades while everyday Americans struggled. If that makes me a headline chaser, maybe it's because the truth I speak keeps making the headlines." The auditorium thundered with cheers. Clinton shifted uncomfortably in his chair, visibly caught off guard. For the first time that evening, it wasn't his words commanding the room, it was hers. Clinton leaned back in his chair, forcing a smirk as he picked up his microphone again. He wasn't about to let a congresswoman, especially one younger and fresher in politics, have the last word. "Now hold on a second," he said, waving his hand dismissively. "It's easy to fire up a crowd with slogans and catchy lines. But governing is about compromise, not confrontation. I built bridges, I brought people together. What you're doing is just dividing the room with noise." A ripple of mixed reactions swept through the audience. Some clapped politely, but most looked uneasy. Clinton's tone had shifted from confident to defensive. Crockett didn't flinch. She stepped closer, her voice rising above his with precision and fire. "Dividing the room? Let me remind you, truth doesn't divide, it reveals. And if that truth makes some people uncomfortable, maybe it's because they've grown too comfortable with a broken system." The crowd roared. Clinton tried to interject, but Crockett pressed forward, her words sharp as glass. "You talk about building bridges, Mr. President, but let's be real, some of those bridges only went one way. Toward the wealthy, toward the powerful, toward those already sitting at the table. I'm here to make sure the people who never even got an invitation finally get their seat." The audience shot to their feet in a standing ovation. Clinton's smirk faded, his jaw tightening as he realized the moment had slipped out of his control. Cameras captured every second, and the clip was destined to dominate headlines by morning. Clinton adjusted his tie, trying to reclaim his footing. He leaned into the microphone, his voice dropping low as if to remind everyone of his authority. Congresswoman, passion is fine. But passion without wisdom leads to chaos. You're new to this game. Maybe one day you'll understand that experience is what keeps the ship steady. Until then, perhaps you should listen a little more and talk a little less. The jab was sharp, calculated to belittle her in front of the audience. A few gasps echoed across the hall, but the majority waited in silence, sensing Jasmine Crockett's response would decide the night. She paused deliberately, letting his words hang in the air. Then she stepped forward, her gaze never leaving his. Talk less. Mr. President, with all due respect, if women had stayed quiet in history, we wouldn't even have the right to stand on this stage. Silence has never changed the world, speaking truth has. The audience erupted again, louder than before. Cameras flashed in a frenzy. Clinton's attempt at condescension had backfired spectacularly. Crockett's voice grew sharper, her tone laced with finality. You call this a game? That's the problem. For too many politicians, it's always been a game, of power, of deals, of survival. But for the people I represent, this isn't a game. It's rent, it's food, it's dignity. And if that makes me sound like a storm in your calm little harbor, then I guess it's time someone shook the waters. The standing ovation was deafening now. Clinton froze, his expression caught between anger and disbelief. The cameras captured his discomfort as Crockett turned slightly, handing the microphone back to the moderator with calm finality. The room had made its decision. She hadn't just clapped back, she had humiliated him. By the time the event ended, reporters were already sprinting toward the exits, phones pressed to their ears, dictating furious notes. The tension in the auditorium had cracked into something electric, and everyone knew the story wouldn't stay inside those four walls. Within an hour, clips of Crockett's fiery response flooded social media. Headlines screamed across platforms, Crockett shuts down Clinton in fiery exchange, and standing ovation erupts as Crockett dismantles former president. The video spread like wildfire. Millions watched as Clinton stumbled and Crockett delivered her knockout lines with surgical precision. Hashtags like hashtag Crockett Clapback and hashtag #NotAGame began trending worldwide. On cable news, anchors replayed the footage in slow motion, analyzing every glance, every shift in tone. Commentators who had once dismissed Crockett as a rising but untested voice were now calling her the breakout force of the night. Meanwhile, Clinton's allies scrambled for damage control. His camp released a short statement framing his remarks as a misunderstanding, but it fell flat. The contrast between his condescension and her sharp rebuttal was too clear. Crockett, however, wasn't gloating. When a journalist caught her outside the venue and asked how it felt to humiliate a former president, she simply smiled. "It's not about humiliating anyone," she replied calmly. "It's about reminding people who this fight is for." That single sentence, delivered with humility after a blistering takedown, only amplified her momentum. By nightfall, she wasn't just trending, she was being hailed as the voice who had changed the entire conversation. The next morning, every major network led with the same story, Jasmine Crockett versus Bill Clinton. The showdown dominated headlines, morning talk shows, and radio call-ins. It was the kind of moment that crossed from politics into pop culture. Clips of the confrontation replayed endlessly, dissected from every angle. On one panel, a veteran political analyst leaned forward and admitted, "I've covered Clinton for decades. I've never seen him lose control of a room like that." Crockett didn't just defend herself, she turned the tables entirely. Another commentator added, "This was more than a clash of personalities. It was symbolic. Old politics versus new politics. And last night, the new politics won." On social media, the reaction was even sharper. Memes flooded timelines, images of Clinton looking stunned contrasted with Crockett standing tall, captions like, "Game over," and, "She said what we were all thinking." Young voters in particular latched onto the moment, seeing Crockett as a fearless voice unafraid to challenge even the most powerful names in history. Meanwhile, Clinton's defenders tried to reframe the narrative, arguing that he had only been stressing the importance of experience. But their words felt hollow. Every replay of Crockett's calm, devastating lines drowned out the spin. By noon, even other politicians were weighing in. Some praised Crockett publicly, while others, quietly but clearly, took note of her rising influence. What had started as Clinton's attempt to diminish her had turned into the biggest boost of her career. And Crockett? She wasn't celebrating on camera. Instead, she was already back to work, telling her staff, "Let's make sure the noise turns into action. The people don't need another viral clip. They need results." Behind closed doors, the Clinton camp was in chaos. Advisors huddled around a long oak table, laptops open, headlines flashing on their screens. Every outlet carried the same brutal verdict: Bill Clinton had been outmatched. One aide slammed his notebook shut. "This was supposed to remind people of your legacy," he said, his voice tight. "Instead, all anyone's talking about is Crockett." Clinton rubbed his temples, his jaw clenched. The confident grin he had worn on stage the night before was gone. "She caught me off guard," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "She knew exactly where to hit, and she hit hard." Another aide spoke cautiously. "We can push back, but honestly, sir, if we keep going after her, it'll only make her stronger. Right now, she's untouchable." Clinton's eyes narrowed. He wasn't used to being told that someone else held the upper hand, especially someone he had dismissed as inexperienced. Meanwhile, outside the walls of his inner circle, the narrative only tightened around Crockett. Supporters gathered online and in real life, holding signs that read, "Not a game," and "Crockett for the people." What had begun as a clash on stage was transforming into a rallying cry. Commentators began floating a new, startling question: could Jasmine Crockett's rise signal a generational shift strong enough to reshape the political landscape entirely? For Clinton, the humiliation was public. For Crockett, the momentum was unstoppable. By the weekend, Crockett's supporters had transformed the viral moment into something bigger. What began as trending hashtags now spilled into the streets. Rallies cropped up in Dallas, Houston, Atlanta, and beyond, organized in record time. Handmade signs read, "Truth isn't noise, not a game," and "Crockett Clapback equals courage." News outlets marveled at the speed of it all. One anchor called it the fastest grassroots surge we've seen in years. Another remarked, "She didn't just answer Clinton, she struck a chord with people who feel ignored." Crockett herself kept her focus steady. She released a short video message filmed in her office. No flashy production, no dramatic background, just her speaking directly to the camera. "This movement isn't about me humiliating anyone," she said plainly. "It's about standing up for people who are tired of being treated like pawns in somebody else's power game. If my voice shook the waters, it's only because the waters needed shaking." The video went viral instantly, reinforcing her authenticity. Comment sections overflowed with comments like, "Finally, someone who says it like it is," and "She's the future, not the past." Meanwhile, Clinton watched from the sidelines as his name remained tied not to his decades of political legacy, but to one humiliating night where Jasmine Crockett had dismantled him in front of the world. His allies quietly admitted what he didn't want to hear: Crockett hadn't just won the exchange, she had ignited a movement. Other politicians quickly sensed the shift. By Monday morning, several rising lawmakers posted their support for Jasmine Crockett, sharing clips of her clapback with captions like, "This is leadership," and "She said what needed to be said." Even seasoned figures who had once kept their distance began to carefully align themselves with her. One senator tweeted, "New voices like Representative Crockett remind us that speaking truth to power is not noise, it's progress." The message was clear: they wanted to ride the wave of her momentum rather than stand against it. Cable shows invited Crockett on as a guest, and she handled each appearance with the same sharp balance of grace and fire. She refused to take cheap shots at Clinton, instead pivoting to policy and people. "This isn't about personalities," she told one host. It's about priorities. If the old guard thinks fighting for ordinary families is just making noise, then maybe they've forgotten who they serve. That line alone was replayed across networks for the rest of the day. Clinton, however, grew increasingly agitated. Behind closed doors, he complained to friends that the media was rewriting history, and that Crockett was grandstanding. But every time he tried to push back, it only fanned the flames of her popularity. By the end of the week, Crockett wasn't just the congresswoman who had clapped back, she was being called the future face of the party. Clinton's attack had meant to silence her. Instead, it had catapulted her into the spotlight stronger than ever. By midweek, Clinton could no longer sit quietly while headlines crowned Crockett the new star of the party. Against the advice of several aides, he arranged a televised interview to set the record straight. Sitting across from a primetime anchor, Clinton tried to steady his voice. "Look, I respect Rep. Crockett," he began, forcing a smile. "But let's not get carried away. One fiery speech doesn't equal long-term leadership. Governing is about patience, wisdom, and time. Passion without discipline is dangerous." The anchor nodded politely, but the tone was clear. Clinton was attempting to frame himself as the seasoned adult, and Crockett as the reckless newcomer. But Crockett didn't take the bait. That very evening, she went live on her own social media, just her, sitting in her living room, no studio lights, no polish. Her voice was steady, direct, and unmistakably authentic. "Leadership isn't measured by how many years you've sat in a chair," she said. "It's measured by how many lives you've changed while you were sitting there. If someone thinks speaking up for working families is reckless, then I'm proud to be reckless for the people who need it most." The live stream exploded. Viewers poured in by the hundreds of thousands, flooding the comments with hearts, applause emojis, and rallying cries. By the time she signed off, hashtags like #RecklessForThePeople were trending. The next morning, headlines weren't about Clinton's interview, they were about Crockett's live response. Once again, he had tried to reclaim the narrative, and once again, she had taken it from him effortlessly. For Clinton, it was a desperate swing. For Crockett, it was another victory. Clinton's frustration boiled over in private. Inside his home office, he paced the floor, phone in hand, venting to a longtime ally. "I built this party," he snapped. "And now they're acting like one viral clip erases decades of work. She's not seasoned, she's not ready, she just knows how to work a crowd." His ally tried to calm him, but Clinton's voice rose louder. "Do you know how humiliating this is? I went toe-to-toe with world leaders, and now everyone's replaying me losing to a freshman congresswoman. Meanwhile, the world outside was moving on without him." Crockett's name was plastered across late-night comedy shows, podcasts, and op-eds. She was no longer just a trending topic, she was becoming a household name. On one late-night segment, a comedian quipped, "Clinton went in to lecture Crockett about experience, and she gave him a masterclass in reality." The studio audience roared, and the clip racked up millions of views online. Crockett, unfazed, pressed forward with her work. She announced a new town hall series called Not a Game, Conversations with the People, framing it as a way to turn viral energy into grassroots dialogue. Tickets for the first event sold out in less than an hour. Clinton's meltdown behind closed doors contrasted sharply with Crockett's growing calm, calculated influence. The harder he pushed against the tide, the more irrelevant he appeared. For the first time in his long political career, Bill Clinton wasn't just facing criticism, he was facing the possibility of being overshadowed by someone he had once dismissed entirely. The night of Jasmine Crockett's first Not a Game town hall arrived, and the energy was electric. The venue, a community center in Dallas, was packed wall to wall, teachers, nurses, veterans, small business owners, all eager to hear from the congresswoman who had silenced a former president. Cameras lined the back of the room, but this wasn't a flashy production. Crockett walked onto the stage in a simple blazer, waved to the crowd, and sat on a stool with a microphone in hand. There was no teleprompter, no script, just her and the people. I didn't call this town hall to talk about viral moments, she began, her voice calm but firm. I called it because too often, politics gets treated like a game. But the folks in this room? You don't live in a game. You live in reality. So tonight, I want to listen as much as I speak. Hands shot up immediately. A mother asked about childcare costs. A veteran spoke about housing insecurity. A teacher shared her struggles with overcrowded classrooms. Crockett leaned forward, listening intently, taking notes, and responding with both empathy and policy. The atmosphere was electric, not because she was attacking anyone, but because she was connecting. Clips of her exchanges spread online almost instantly, with captions like, "This is what leadership looks like," and, "Not a speech, this is service." By the end of the evening, attendees stood in a thunderous ovation. Reporters covering the event wrote glowing pieces, from viral moment to movement, Crockett delivers substance after the spotlight. Meanwhile, back in New York, Clinton watched the coverage in silence. The more Crockett leaned into authenticity and people-focused leadership, the more irrelevant his counterattacks seemed. What had begun as an attempt to embarrass her had transformed into a defining chapter in her rise. Crockett wasn't just the woman who humiliated Bill Clinton, she was fast becoming the leader who inspired millions. Weeks later, the political landscape looked very different. Clinton, once the master of commanding any stage, had quietly retreated from the spotlight. Invitations to speak dwindled, and when he did appear, the questions always circled back to that night, the night Jasmine Crockett humiliated him in front of the world. He hated it, but there was no escaping it. His attempt to dismiss her had backfired so completely that his own legacy now seemed tied to her rise. Crockett, on the other hand, only grew stronger. Her "Not a Game" town halls spread to multiple cities, each one drawing bigger crowds and more media attention. What began as a viral clapback had transformed into a movement anchored in listening, action, and raw authenticity. Commentators who once described her as a firebrand newcomer now called her the voice of a generation. Editorials declared her the politician who reminded people what leadership should feel like, unfiltered, unapologetic, and rooted in the struggles of ordinary Americans. When asked by a reporter what she thought about ending Bill Clinton's dominance in a single night, Crockett shook her head. "I didn't end anything," she said softly. "I just reminded people that no one is untouchable, not even former presidents. This isn't about who stands tallest on a stage. It's about who stands firm with the people." Her humility made the moment even more powerful. Clinton had tried to reduce her to noise. Instead, she had turned his attack into the very spark that carried her into history. For him, it was a humiliating defeat. For her, it was the beginning of something far greater. Jasmine Crockett wasn't just a congresswoman anymore, she was a movement, a force, and for many, the future.